The Criterion remaster of Inland Empire is insane, so I thought I'd do a quick little video about that. I say a quick little video, I mean for me. For you, it's going to be overlong and dense. They say you should always sell the audience on your video in the first 10 seconds. This happens all the time, right? A remaster comes out, it maybe fucks something up, no one gives a shit, some weird nerds get unjustifiably cross about it. But that hasn't happened for this. I haven't seen anyone else getting cross about this, and my righteous fury is entirely justified. Now, the point of this video, I'm not just going to complain. I think there's some interesting things to talk about here. I have my own approach that I would take if I were going to remaster Inland Empire, so I'll do some shots and you can see what I'm talking about. But first, I'm going to complain. If you haven't seen Inland Empire, it's a very obtuse Lynch movie about an actress in trouble. It's got a bunch of layers of meta-narrative. It's a very alienating movie, and it was shot entirely on consumer-level digital video in like 2005. What Lynch did at the time was really lean into those limitations, really use the aesthetic of early digital video to create an uncanniness, to create alienation. It has a very deliberate aesthetic. No one else really has made a movie that looks like this, and it really works. So the idea of remastering it is just on its own kind of crazy. It's not the sort of thing that you can punch up, but I guess Criterion needed something to sell, so they have gone about it. Now, what they've done, they've taken a copy of the original video, AI upscaled it, done some color grading, and slapped some film grain on top. So I guess that's all you can do. And you know, is that so bad? Yeah, it is. So my big problem is really just the AI upscaling. There is work that's gone into putting this together, but my overall impression of the scaling is that they've just dragged the footage into Topaz Gigapixel AI and pressed the go button. AI upscaling is a useful tool. Sometimes, not exactly what you think it is, but it has its uses. But you can see it aggressively paints in fake detail that isn't there. It's all wobbling around, it doesn't make any sense. Particularly, the eyes look terrible. That's not what eyes look like. To any artist in any field, eyes are the thing that you really gotta nail. They're the window into the soul. To an AI upscaler, eyes are a fiddly detail area, but you just get a lot of nasty fake details and hard edges, over-contrasted bits, a weird mix of muddiness and sharpness and jitter and uncanny smooth movement. I think this tech is useful. I use this tech occasionally. It has its uses, it has places where you don't want to use it. You can push it too far, and when you do use it, it's more about actually putting some craft into it. Finessing it to look good. So I feel like remastering Inland Empire is just sort of baffling. I think a transformative remix does have value. It's not going to replace the original, but in its contrast to the original, there's something to that. I of course think that because I'm personally invested in the concept, but this doesn't even get to the point where we can have that discussion. Shockingly, and this is the part I wasn't expecting, it exclusively makes it look slightly worse in new and unintended ways. To me, there is an exciting challenge in trying to remaster this. There's a lot of problems with that original footage, you know, technical problems that you could try and fix. I guess my dream would be a fuck 'em up visual overhaul of the whole thing, released alongside the original, of course, and the original would be the version that you'd normally watch. Instead, what we've got is a mediocre, minor downgrade as a replacement for the original. AI upscaled Inland Empire is like something you'd come up with as a joke. Obviously, aesthetically, it was built to look like this. If you want to be reductive about it, which I do, Lynch wanted to work in a more freeform, creative way, couldn't get funding to do that with a feature, so making a movie on a consumer camera let him have that creative freedom, have that opportunity, and he just took the limitations that imposed and he leaned into them. Very effectively, I would say. But anyway, I suppose it's worth mentioning that Remaster does have David Lynch's blessing, and, you know, just as Inland Empire played with the tech of the time, this plays with the tech of our time. So maybe in some way it does work. It's updating that alienating effect for a new era. But if that is the case, and they've deliberately made it suck, then why did they do a very tasteful modern grade and add some film grain? And it's weird, because the biggest problem isn't even the resolution. I mean, it was shot at 480p, so if you're watching this in HD, it's about this size, and then they scaled it up for release using bicubic interpolation, which is just your normal scaling the image up by cleverly averaging out the color values between all of the original pixels. And that's fine. But of course, now we have AI upscaling. And the exciting thing about AI upscaling is that it has a cool name. But the big problem with Inland Empire's image is the dynamic range. On your screen right now, from black to white, we have 256 shades to work with. Now film, obviously, it doesn't use color values of pixels, so famously with film, as you get to the brightest point of your image, all the colors roll off very nicely, very smoothly. You don't get that with digital video. To this day, you don't get that with digital video. Once you hit white, it just cuts off. The pixel color values hit pure white, so bang, that's it. What we do nowadays is when we shoot digital, we record way more color information than we need, so hopefully we never hit pure white, we never hit pure black, and then we can tweak it afterwards to look right. But at the time of Inland Empire, camera sensors couldn't do that yet. So all of the image exists within a very small color range, and once you go outside of that, it just cuts off to pure white or pure black. And then what particularly sticks out to me is the sharpening. It has a very strong Unsharp Mask effect, which is not a new effect. It's been around since film, but it was basically necessary with early digital to make it look sharp, and even to this day most cameras have it bundled in. You get some sharpening coming straight out of the camera. So it's a look that we associate with digital, and it's not a very nice look either. Now, despite being used to make the image look sharper, it's called the Unsharp Mask effect. So I'll explain why that is. Sharpness is hard edges, right? So what we need to do is we need to find every edge and make the darker side of it darker and the lighter side of it lighter. And by increasing the contrast around the edge, we can increase how sharp that edge looks. We can't actually add any information that wasn't there originally. All we can do is just find all the existing edges and make them more pronounced. And whether you're like in Photoshop or your Photos app or Instagram, whatever, whenever you're doing sharpening, this is what's going on. So what we do, we take a copy of our image, we slap it over top of our existing image, and we subtract it. Subtract the color value of every pixel from the one it's on top of. So everything cancels each other out. Everything turns black. And let's just pretend for a second that this shade of gray is black. If we blur our top layer a bit, what we'll see is most of the image stays black. It's the same color over top of the same color, except for the edges. On the brighter side of an edge, it's going to be a bit above black, and on the darker side of an edge, it's going to be a bit below. And all we have to do is just take this new, mostly black image and add it over top of our original image. Add those color values. So the bits that were above black get slightly brighter, the bits that were below get slightly darker. That's it. And particularly with Inland Empire, it was sharpened at this small resolution to look good at this small resolution, and then blown up. So you get all these massive black and white lines everywhere. So with this input footage, I don't think AI upscaling on its own is the solution. AI upscaling sort of came about in 2014. There was a paper on like theoretically doing this. In 2015, I think it was sort of first put into practice, and that was called Waifu 2X. And despite all the tech sector repackaging and rebranding, I think it's important to note that most of the work in the field has been done by guys who wanted to see a bigger drawing of an anime girl. Now, there's different exact methods of how this is done, but the basic idea is you get a bunch of high-resolution images, you make them low quality and shitty, and you feed them into a neural network, and you go, look, I took all of these shitty images and made them beautiful. You have to learn to do that. And it learns to hallucinate details into the low-quality images to make them higher quality. So basically like painting over the images by inventing stuff that wasn't there. And really, most of the enhancement that you get out of it has nothing to do with the scaling at all. It's more to do with the sharpening and the noise and like painting in fake textures. Now, that doesn't exactly work for video. Video has, you know, movement, motion, details appearing, disappearing. So the popular approach is to actually take the motion of the video and move our fake textures with that to create something that's a bit more stable. But while that produces something smoother and more, technically consistent, it does have its own sort of smoothing effect. You're now not just painting in fake details, but you're sort of morphing them together. It creates this really weird, like motion smoothing. And we all know how weird nerds like to get about that. And those problems are even more pronounced with Inland Empire because it is a very extreme upscale that we're having to do, and it plays around quite a bit with like frame rate. And there's a lot of very subtle performances where people are very still, and that is the sort of thing that this smeary effect does not handle well. I thought it was like a silly idea before I actually saw footage, and now it's like, this is insane. It's like the worst case for AI upscale. We've got a bunch of motion issues, we're losing a bunch of detail that we do want, and gaining a bunch of detail that we don't. We're literally losing the subtleties of the performances. And then at the same time, it's painting over the existing sharpening effect to make it more pronounced, and sharpening that as this industry standard all-in-one solution does its magic to make it look more resolution-y. But really what it's doing is removing the subtleties and exaggerating the crunchy artifacting. Topaz Gigapixel AI is just like an all-in-one black box. They have like a few models to choose from, but it really just does like a bunch of transformations to your image that you have no control over. So you can get better results than the industry standard for free, building off of the work done by the anime waifu guys. Say what you will about the anime waifu guys, they do have the detail-oriented approach and the tenacity. Then they've added some fake film grain over top, which is sort of amusing, but understandable, I think. I can't show you on YouTube because YouTube compression will just remove it, but grain is a really great effect. It sort of tricks the human eye into imagining that there's more detail than we can see. I guess it's not applied particularly well here, but anyway, it's nice fake detail. At least there's one thing happening on the screen that's actually happening in 4K, and then they've done a color grade of everything, which is fine. I mean, I think the original aesthetic of Inland Empire worked, but whatever. If you're going to do this, it's done quite well. Simple stuff, just sort of tweaking the camera's color to be a little bit more modern, tasteful, palatable, slapping a vignette on everything, that's fine. Professional colorists have done a good job. So, if I were to remaster Inland Empire, there are a few things that I would want to do. First, I want to get rid of the original sharpening, which we can't really do, it's baked in, but we can kind of mitigate the effects of it. The real problem to me is not so much the brighter side, I think that looks okay, but the shadows, they get really sort of black and nasty. I don't think there's any proper solution for this, but here is my solution. I go through the same process that you would do to actually sharpen it. I blur an image, I stack it over top of the original image, but then instead of subtracting it, I divide it. I'll put the formula up, but I wouldn't worry about it. Don't think about it too much. What that does is it only shows up areas where the bottom layer is darker than the top. So if there's a bright area and then within the range of my blur, there's a shadow, that's going to show up. What I'm basically left with is a selection of just the areas that were darkened by sharpening. So I can use that selection to just bring those colors up a bit. There's a few ways you could go about that. I've just gone for a little bit of a blur, a little bit of brightening, but that definitely hasn't helped the sharpness of our image. In fact, it's made it worse. So here is where AI upscaling can be really useful. So my method would be to first upscale using Re-SR, which is my favorite of the upscaling models. The different thing about Re-SR is they've put a lot of work into degrading their low quality images for the training. From their high quality images, they put a lot of work into really making them look like real world low resolution images. So what you end up with is a very faithful, all-purpose upscaler for real world images. It's great at removing artifacting, not painting over it like Topaz did, while keeping blurred areas blurred. Detail areas it retains, and it also doesn't do any sharpening or any bullshit. It doesn't really hallucinate too much detail of its own. However, that does mean it's not hugely exciting. It is like so faithful most people aren't going to notice the difference. It's not like faking any detail or sharpness. It's not going to have like the high resolution look. It's just faithfully recreating the image at a larger size. So I'd also throw in an upscaler that does do some extreme bullshit. I'd probably use Re-Sharpening GAN, but you know, you could use a Topaz upscaler. There are a bunch of other models that all have their own quirks, do their own weird stuff based on the input data that they were trained with. And if there were like a flat texture somewhere that the AI did a really great job of hallucinating some fake detail onto, and I wanted to keep it, then I might run those frames through something like EB Synth to get that motion smoothing over time. I definitely wouldn't do it to everything though. That would be a horrible mistake. And that's the important thing with the AI upscaling, is the blending. I'd never use any of that all on its own. Even RealSR, which is the one that I like the most, does make things a little bit smooth and muddy and weird, and it does hallucinate a bit. That's like the entire point of them. So I would take a lot of care to blend them properly. There's so many like subtle details in your original image that no matter what model you're using to upscale, there's always going to be stuff that you're missing. So I would only ever blend a little bit of my upscales on top to fake little bits of detail in certain places. Just a tiny bit. Select maybe the skin tone and apply a bit more of it there, or the hair and apply a bit more of it there. Maybe select some background detail that's getting too sharp and remove that, and really like not applying too much to the eyes themselves, because the eyes basically always get fucked up. So what I'm left with is like the bicubic interpolation with a tiny punch up. But now what I can do is some sharpening. The great thing about all the fake details that the AI has imagined is not replacing my image with them, but using them. I can sharpen it, and I'm going to be able to really dial in a very fine sharpening, and it's going to look good. Or even I can just use the sharpening result. Take my RealSR AI generated output, sharpen it, and then remove the AI image entirely. Just use the sharpening. So I'm just getting increased contrast around the fake details that the AI has imagined. So that's going to make the original image look even sharper, crisper, high resolution, but it's going to get rid of the fake details that maybe look kind of wonky. Hint at detail. But whatever we want to do, obviously by doing it ourselves, we have so much control that you just don't get if you plug it into an all-in-one solution and press go. And then the other trick for sharpness is just to add grain, which again I can't really show you, but it is fantastic. The human eye is the best sharpener known to man. All we have to do is trick it a little bit. So that's how I would upscale and increase the resolution and whatever. But I don't even think that's really the problem with the image of this movie. If you are going to fuck around with this movie, fuck around with the color, the big thing to me is you should try and improve the dynamic range. It's something I've been waiting for a long time. It's like some AI tool that works like the upscalers, where you can feed in an image and it'll take the areas that are clipping at the top and the bottom and fill them. But that tool doesn't exist. So my theory for now is we can use a text-to-image generator, like Stable Diffusion. So first we take our image and we cut out the areas that are clipping, we reduce the dynamic range even further, and then we fill those areas that were clipping with vaguely some noise that is in the color range that we want. And then we tell a text-to-image generator to recreate that image using our fake image as a basis. And out of that we get a passable texture, which we can then punch up, tidy up a little bit, and track into our footage, which is a bunch of work actually. It's not perfect or anything, but it does kind of work. The workflow isn't there, obviously, but I think the technology kind of is. Historically, the only way that you could recover that sort of detail would be to entirely replace the background. But now we have a quick way of generating sort of okay textures. Though I was so impressed with my first 2 attempts that I did push it too far. So if I were gonna do the grade, I would probably be a little bit more faithful to the original. I wouldn't go so extreme in like desaturation. I mean, obviously that aesthetic was a limitation. It's just like the footage that came out of the camera. But I think there is like a deliberate aesthetic and color choices that you lose if you aggressively desaturate everything. But that's just personal preference. I like my colors popping, and that's not very popular right now. I get it, whatever. I would do a bit of a skin squeeze, that makes sense. And a vignette makes sense when you're working with low dynamic range footage, because it sort of fakes a little bit of extra dynamic range. And since we have all of these weird and nasty highlights, I'd probably just slap a little bit of a glow on there, just to make them look a little bit more deliberate, like I'm making a shooter in 2006. So there we go. I guess overall, my feeling is not enough care was put into this remaster for it to be worthwhile at all. I would still recommend the original version of Inland Empire over this, and it just feels like this was kind of a waste. And I'm not making some point about AI here today, but like the new exciting AI tools that have been around for a decade do have some value. I've used a bunch of different tools for a bunch of different jobs, but all of them require a lot of manual craft and care to create something worthwhile. But that's it. Check out the original version of Inland Empire, and I'll do like a breakdown of the shots that I've done on the website. But there you go. Yeah, I know. What the fuck was that?